Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. We meet you live from Stein Studios, Ratmalana. Our topic of discussion today revolves around, inevitably, Budget 2019. Is it a populist budget ahead of an election year, or is it a budget which is riddled with a lot of issues? Choices, promises, and then comes opportunities. Can we all meet these three criteria in the next financial year? To discuss all this and more, we've invited three guests to our studios this evening as well. Joining us for the first time on the show is Dr. Aponso, Senior Lecturer. Nice to have you on board, Dr. Aponso. All joining us this evening on the show tonight is the very vocal Mr. Rusirpal Tennakon, Senior Banker. Nice to have you on board as well. Mr. Tennakon is also a member of the Colombo Municipal Council representing the Sri Lanka Freedom Party. Also joining us tonight on the show is Dr. Priyanga Dunusingha, Senior Lecturer at Colombo University. Thank you very much, the three gentlemen, for joining us this evening on the show tonight. The Budget 2019, we start off with Dr. Priyanga Dunusingha, Senior Lecturer at Colombo University. Dr. Priyanga, when you look at the budget, it seems like a very inclusive budget, addressing every concern the people may have or likely to have in the next financial year, in the coming 7 to 8 months. Where do we really stand in terms of Budget 2019? Does it address the concerns of the general public? Do you think that this is an inclusive budget? The time starts now.
Okay, certainly the budget has attempted at satisfying certain segment, most of the segment in the society, for example, public servants, pensioners, general public, and international, in particular international financial organization. That is one of the reasons why that even the IMF yesterday came forward and certified the budget as forward-looking. In that context, we could see that generally we can identify number of proposals cater to certain segment in the society, including the agriculture, then the education, health, and the rural development, and like that. However, there are a number of other issues that we must take into account as well. We know that when the budget is presented, the economy faces number of issues. In particular, we know that 2018 was a year that recorded growth rate which is just higher than what is recorded by Sri Lanka in 2001, in the year in which certain the airport was bombed and all. We recorded a minus growth rate, 1.5. After that, Sri Lanka recorded just 3% GDP growth rate in 2018. At the same time, we know that the economy faces a serious issue with respect to employment creation, in particular quality employment creation, and also after we face a number of issues some month ago with respect to balance of payment and rupee depreciation, and again the public debt. Even though we see that certain proposals are there in the budget to satisfy some number of, some segment in the society, we don't see this budget has addressed critical issues faced by the economy at this moment.
Dr. Dunusingha, you speak about the growth rate. Let's talk a little bit about that. 2018 just saw 3% economic growth. However, the budget articulates about the year 2024, where the growth rate will stand at 4.8% based on the speech made by Minister Mangala Samarveera in his capacity as the Minister of Finance. Where does it boil down to? Because it seems that the growth rate is not going to surpass 5%, but it's going to be below 3, just above 3 and 5%. Isn't this a concern to economists?
Yes, definitely. That is what I certainly raise, that the government own forecast just stand below the 5%. So with that, actually, we have several challenges with respect to employment creation. Then the with the challenges with respect to balance of payment and number of areas. So I think we have come to a situation where that to some extent economy is trapped, where we don't see a structural change. Structural change in the sense that we find it very difficult that we don't see continuous movement of employment from agriculture to other sectors. Even though we witness the service sector expansion, the type of services that we have developed during last decade or so, we see that actually the lower end services, for example transportation, three-wheel and the other type of transportation based services, and again retail and wholesale services sector, we have seen some expansion. We don't see that we don't see that the quality, the service sector in terms of quality, it has expanded rapidly. So as a result of that, we don't see employment creation in areas where our young people could be attracted.
Thank you very much, Dr. Priyanka Dunasinghe, Senior Lecturer at the Colombo University. I now move my attention to Dr. Indrajit Aponzo, Senior Lecturer. Dr. Aponzo, Dr. Dunasinghe says that the budget itself does not attract the young. However, there are proposals like the home sweet home concept that has been introduced by the government this time around for the newlyweds, giving them a 6% interest rate up to 25 years to obtain a loan of up to 10 million Sri Lankan rupees. Very attractive indeed. Does all these proposals that have been in Budget 2019 easy to implement given the present economic condition that is plaguing the country at present? The time starts now.
Okay, I would look at the budget from an entirely different perspective. Partly because the budget is something that excites everyone, investors, people, politicians. But I think there's something seriously missing in this whole budget discussion is we consider it's like an annual ritual. You have a budget, you have the excitement, and then you forget about it, wait for the next budget, go on doing that. That's a totally wrong way to look at it. A government, when it comes into power, it gives its vision, its targets on a medium-term perspective initially. That's about 5 years. So the budget is basically the vehicle of delivery of these medium-term objectives. But it is not just an annual expenditure revenue statement. It's much bigger than that. In fact, when we discuss budget in our discussion fora, we call budget is the mother of all policies. And also we say budget is the one that creates the gearbox of the economic vehicle. It can retard the economy, it can accelerate the economy. When it doesn't do the function, the economy suffers. At the same time, you can't take the gearbox in isolation from the vehicle. It's not something that is planted from thin air into a system. It has to be within. What it might mean is budget has to have a proper connection with the economy so that economy feeds onto the budget and budget feeds onto the economy.
So are you trying to say, Dr. Aponzo, that the budget 2019 is not a reflection of the present economy of the country?
Well, the economy is a flow. It's a flowing thing. It flows with various kinds of activities that are connecting to it. I would say this budget 2019 is the budget that you are presenting at your retirement point. So
So the
budget.
government just has 1 more year to go. So
Well, 1 more year is a very short period of time.
absolutely. So they
For
are
a
on time.
medium-term perspective.
Yeah.
I would say
Yeah.
where things went wrong was 2015.
2015.
15. You should have set the ball rolling in 2015 to accelerate the process in 2019. You are not going to restart the engine in 2019, have installed the engine from 2015 to 16 to 17 to 18. As my good friend Priyanka said, we are hitting 3%. That's very shameful economic growth for a country like Sri Lanka.
But globally there is a meltdown as far as economies
No.
are
I think
concerned.
this is a wrong way to look at it. If we are part of that meltdown, how does India doing it differently? India is a much more complicated country. We are not that integrated with the rest of the world. Hitting 5% economic growth is the bare minimum. You're not talking about economic growth if you're not hitting at least 6%, 7% economic growth. This is like limited over cricket. You're hitting 3.5 runs per over and thinking you're going to win the race? Well, I think we have to relook at ourselves, go in front of a mirror and really see what's going wrong. In that context, as I could say, is when you have not put the vision in right perspective, looking at it 2019, trying to create a miracle is absolutely myopic and, as quite rightly said,
Thank
very
you.
dream thinking.
Thank you very much, Dr. Indrajit, senior lecturer. You speak about cricket. I think our cricket team thinks that 3.5 runs per over will win matches. So unfortunately or fortunately, we are now in this trot of as far as Sri Lanka cricket is concerned. So let's talk about talk to Mr. Rusripal Thanakon, senior banker and also CMC councillor of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party. Mr. Thanakon, is this a populist budget targeting an election? It seems like it, and it sometimes seems, no, it is not. It looks very inclusive. But in a politician's perspective, what is your thinking? Do you think that this is a populist budget targeting an election? The time starts now.
Yes. For me, this budget looks like a much restricted and a contained budget than a budget that should be, that should take that should address the situation of a pending election, and being the last budget proposed by this government in their last lap. I mean, there was much expectation than this to take place, to materialize through this budget, and it has not happened. Now, why I say that it is a contained budget is, this is not the type of budget normally presented if the politicians who present that budget have the freedom to do so. I think we were having a lot of restraining from external forces not to do what they really wanted. Therefore, even against their wish, they had to contain themselves to a budget of this nature. Therefore, it has become a budget appreciated and satisfying a few of the economists, bringing dissatisfaction to a large number of people, and bewilderment to the politicians. They are bewildered what this is, because they expected even the people in the opposition, people in the government, they are equally disturbed. What is this budget? Where are they? Where is this budget going to take us? So this is the state of affairs of this budget. I think it is an IMF dictated budget. The last experience we had with the IMF was the staff committee report that was submitted a few weeks back after they conducted their survey, before they released the last tranche of the IMF grant loan. And I think there were many conditionalities attached to that staff report, because it was suspended for some time for various reasons, and then now to revive that, they went through the whole process and they laid down the conditions to which even unwillingly the government had to abide by. This is what has happened to this budget.
But I'm sure the IMF did not tell the government to give a 6% loan to newlyweds for 25 years amounting to 10 million rupees.
Yeah.
Where is the money, Mr.
Those are loans, and loans we know. Where are they directing the? There are so many things that I think the IMF would not have permitted them to do, because they have brought certain facilitations under the guise of granting loans, because otherwise they would have done it in a different way. They were not permitted to do that. That is why I say it is a contained budget. They'll have to work within certain areas just to show that they are not disbursing things out, but at the same time they want to disburse. That is what has happened. That is why they have resorted to, if you analyze this budget, I think if you go to any of the commercial banks, their lending schemes, that scheme, this scheme, Kanta Naya, that Naya, this Naya. I mean, it's something like that. It's like a commercial lending operation.
But which bank is going to say yes to a 6% loan being granted to individuals when the going rate right now is 15.6 to 16%?
Obviously, the state banks which are under the control of the government. Other banks will have their own restrictions and they will stand on their principles, and then they will put up their own conditionalities. But the state banks can't do that.
So
they will be
what is the
virtually
criteria?
dictated. They will be virtually dictated to do what the government want to do, what they have been doing these 5 years. And I'm shocked to see why the IMF failed to understand the status of the state-owned banks in this country. They have not addressed that issue. Totally failed, I should say. They are not putting up in reality, they are not putting up the correct, the situation out with regard to their operations, with regard to their future, with regard to their accounting. This is a situation. So therefore, in this situation, the only resort, the last resort they have is to again turn back to the state-owned banking sector and see whether they can give something by way of a relief.
Mr. Nakon,
can I just add a point here?
Yes.
I think you got to have a broader perspective as well. I don't 100% agree with the IMF being the culprit here, but of course IMF does play a big role with regard to agreements the government gets into with the IMF, and as a result, government is bound by those conditions. But let me take the point in a slightly broader perspective. When budget has three pieces: revenue, expenditure, and deficit financing. All these pieces affect the economy in different ways. Now, the revenue almost relies on the economic activity. If you generate economic activity sufficiently, your revenue goes up. So, on the one side, if you don't focus on the economic activity, economic growth, you are up against a serious challenge of declining revenue. Now, when that happens, then what happens is you have to look at the other side, the expenditure side. Now, the expenditure side has maybe two elements. One is the expenditure side is to promote economic growth through various activities, including what we call public investments. And the second point of economic expenditure side is making sure there are so many people who are getting left out in the whole process, and as a result, you need to provide various kinds of subsidies and assistance. And in that the same context, you might bring in the incentives as well. Now, if you don't manage this right, what happens is you are faced with the rising budget deficit. Now, if you go back to 2015, the expenditure side jumped something like 500 billion from the previous year. 500 billion from the previous. Normally, the rise is around 100 billion every year on year. So when you let the expenditure to balloon to 500 billion, you have a serious challenge now. And as a result, it eats into the economic growth. So you have a situation of revenue falling as well. Now you have a revenue falling, expenditure rising. What do? You raise the debts. When you raise the debts, then you get the legacy of having to sustain the interest rates and the repayments of the debt.
No, but the question that I think what was lingering on the mindset of Mr. Thinakon, if I can speak on behalf of you, Mr. Thinakon, was the fact that the implementation of the budget itself is not there. Because let's talk about the home sweet home concept, Dr. Indrajit. Where is the money? Does Sri Lanka have the money to finance such a proposal?
Swami,
If so, what is the criteria going to be? When you say newlyweds, it's a very broad perspective.
Samir, I wish to add, to something
Yes.
what Dr. Fonso said. Now, I feel that this is a budget in isolating itself from the declared policies of the government. You analyze, you go back and take a look at the various policy statements made by the Prime Minister at different times. He has made 3 policy statements in the Parliament. 3 policy statements. And all policy statements were made just before the budgets were presented. Now, the budget that he referred to was the 2015 budget, just after the interim budget of the 100-day government. That was the worst. What the damage that they did, it started really in the 100-day interim budget.
Absolutely.
That is where the whole entire decline started.
That's where the rot started.
Exactly. And then you come to the 2015 budget proper. Just before the budget, the Prime Minister announced a very attractive development package. I think if we went through that, Doctor, I think this country would not have been in this position. This country would have been in a very, very, very entirely different situation in the world. We would have been playing a very dynamic role in the activities globally, but we failed miserably. It remained merely a policy statement confined to political expressions, not a plan. In the absence of a plan, nothing that was spelled out in that statement materialized. As a result of this, the whole country is paying today. And why I say this budget is isolated from all those policy stands is, we are talking of all kinds of loans, grants, assistance, trying to bring in people into the network and to get them to move into the dynamics of producing something. That is a good thing. I don't deny that. But is it the only thing that we are thinking of? What were we predicting? What were we planning to do? Was that our correct direction? That direction is entirely lost.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thinakon. I open the floor for questions from our journalist, Deshan Gonavar. So, Deshan, it's all yours today. So, let's start from you and then end with you as well, hopefully.
Thank you, Swami. Thank you. I want to pose my first question to Mr. Thinakon. You yourself as a bank, of course, and this is a proposal that has been brought to light, especially on social media among the younger population with regard to the housing loan scheme. Now, they've proposed that up to 10 million rupees can be taken as a loan, and Shamir discussed earlier about the financial feasibility with regard to the banking sector. But just enlighten the viewers, if you wanted to take a 10 million loan on a house, what exactly would you need to provide?
You are exactly on the point, because 10 million is just a limit that they have set up. In banking terms, it doesn't mean a thing. Everything depends on the borrower's capacity to repay the loan and then to sustain the loan. I mean, that is determined by various other factors. The income, the capacity to repay, and the applied interest rates, and the purpose for which it is taken. All those things are very significant and applicable factors. So simply by laying down a limit of 10 million, I don't think even a decimal percent, one decimal percent of the population will be eligible to take 10 million. According to the banking I know, impossible. Today, to serve a loan of 1 million, a person has to have an income of at least 200,000 a month to realistically serve a loan. Otherwise, he can't. You can take a loan, but it will go into past due and non-performing very soon. Today, the situation of the banks, why I touched on the state banks is one reason. The IMF has failed to realize this. The non-performing portfolio of the state banks will be in a very worse situation in 2 or 3 months' time. Do you know that by having to finance some of the state-owned enterprises which are deteriorating completely, the banks are running the risk of becoming undercapitalized?
Mr. Tennakoon,
Seriously
but
becoming undercapitalized.
just for the benefit of the viewers.
I'll elaborate that with one example. How much do you think has the two banks lent to Sri Lankan Airlines?
That's what I was getting to earlier.
65 billion. And you know how this 65 billion is kept in the books of the bank as in the current section of the banks? From a piece of paper that is given by the Treasury, supporting that
The Treasury guarantees.
that it is a loan that is guaranteed by the government. In turn, how is the government guaranteeing this? The government did not have its own money to lend to this institution. They got the banks to lend it by giving a piece of paper. This whole exercise, it doesn't apply only to the Sri Lankan Airlines. It applies to many other places. We are in very big danger. IMF has failed to see this. I am publicly saying this. And it's an impending danger that we are facing. The entire banking industry in this country, especially the state-owned banks, their non-performing portfolio increasing tremendously, signaling a danger.
Dr. Ponzo, I want to move the attention to you, and I want to ask you now, there are clearly large risks involved with the banking sector in the country, and the banking sector is essential, especially if you want to improve the status of your economy. It's more or less the backbone of the economy. Now, in a situation like this, and with a new budget being presented, in a situation where we are in need of investment, do you think the lack of confidence or the questions surrounding the banking sector is going to leave us wanting?
Well, I think there is a misconception that the banks are financing investments. Banks don't finance investments, especially I'm talking about the fixed investments. If you look at other countries like China and those countries that have developed, the investment has come through either from corporate earnings or long-term financial development banks. This is the way to go forward. Unfortunately for Sri Lanka, we lost that ability in 1995, Mr. Rudrapal?
1992.
1992, by the privatization of the National Development Bank. And DFCC was already a private bank, but it had its government influence as well.
Yes.
So basically the concept of development banks was killed in the early 90s. That's where the so-called financing of investment by the banks concept has been totally misinterpreted and misconstrued. So at the moment, what the banks are doing is they are providing the working capital, overdrafts, various other things, and the housing loans is the only long-term investment that is being financed by the bank in a big way. I mean, it's a reasonable way. So, but what is happening now here is, even those lending, as I was reading some of the statistics, the non-performing loan sectors are on the rise. How does it happen? It happens when the economy is stagnating. Many businesses finding difficult to roll over their cash flow. And that's one reason. The second reason is, when the expenditure side goes up, you have to finance the expenditure. There are two ways of doing that. Land that expenditure on the public through VAT and indirect taxes, which means you are pickpocketing the cash from people, and that reduces the capacity of the people to absorb the production. So people can't buy. Second, you raise the debt. You borrow debt. And when you do both, these are extremely bad for the economy, because borrowing means you're raising the interest rates. So which is again coming de facto on the cost of production. So it's going to hit the exports, it's going to hit the production, and it's going to hit the consumption.
So, Dr. Dunusing, you are saying that there is no gearbox, so there is no acceleration. This is a corpse without a head.
Dr. Aponso.
Yes.
Dr. Aponso said.
Yeah, Dr.
No, well,
Ponzo,
it's a
is that
kind
what
of, I'm not saying it's in the vegetable state, but it definitely is, we have got into the situation, we are finding 3.5% is okay. People
I'll tell you a
feel,
classic example. Why I'm bringing this issue up is, Dr. Aponso, one of the budget proposals are no foreign construction company can bid for government projects unless they are fully foreign funded or there is a joint venture with a local company. Now, this is one of the regulations put forward in the budget proposals. Agreed or not agreed, Dr. Aponso?
yeah,
It's
it is there, yeah.
However, the Sunday newspapers report Chinese company gets multi-billion contract to expand coal yard. So now where is the local company behind it?
I think, here again, we are going to get into details.
Yeah.
Now, what is happening is the details, there are all kinds of stories, but what
But this is not a story. This is
No, what I'm trying to say is
4.6 billion
in the
rupees
budget
being
there are,
allocated to expand the coal yard, and the company is China Machinery Engineering Corporation. There were two bidders. One was Zhangzi Xingtang Engineering Design and CMEC, which I just mentioned right now. So you have a budget proposal, which is well and good. There's no argument about it. But then you have something like this also happening on the side, which was approved a couple of days before the budget was presented. Isn't this somewhat putting a question mark in the mindset of anyone, saying, is the government really genuine in its approach?
I think in the whole budget, that's what I said, in the whole budget has diluted into an annual ritual, which nobody cares.
I just want to take my attention to Dr. Dunusingha. Dr. Dunusingha, the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, which monitors the budget proposals as well as its implementation somewhat, says that they are concerned. They say, quote, and I quote, the past performance of the government in implementing budget proposals has been very disappointing. Hence, it is our hope that the government will be serious about implementation and that the expectations from proposals will be realized. This itself says that the government is very poor in its implementation, and despite bringing somewhat a realistic budget, implementation is going to be very poor. What are your thoughts on this, Dr.
Yeah, I think the position taken by the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce is, I think, very correct. That this is not just confined to the present government, but even the previous government. I think we have seen that government allocate, in particular, capital expenditure, a sizable portion of capital expenditure allocated to certain ministries not spent at the end of the year. So that is something that we have witnessed, I think, during maybe the last decade. And recently, I think the last year, Verite Research monitored, and they conducted a survey to looking into, as a percentage of total budget proposals. They look into, the budget proposal that are implemented on time and some with some lagging time, and then some of the proposals not implemented at all. They found evidence that to suggest that only 10% of the budget proposal are on track with on time, and around, I think, 39% with some time lag, and some proposals such as putting up this import and export bank totally neglected. So I think this new proposal or the suggestions made by the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce actually they raise this concern in this context. We have seen that number of good proposals in this, even in this budget, but we have some doubts to what extent such proposals are properly implemented. So I think.
So I'll tell you a classic example, Dr. Dunsu, just to narrow it down on exactly what we're talking about. It says levy on business of casinos increased from rupees 200 million to 400 million. How many casinos are we talking about in Sri Lanka?
Yes, I think.
No, the problem is, are all these proposals that have been brought forward going to bring in the revenue that we are expecting? Because we're talking about 5 to 6 casinos, which will amount to approximately around 1.1 billion Sri Lankan rupees, and that's about it.
Yeah, I think certainly that with respect to numbers, in particular revenue numbers, we have some doubts to what extent government will be able to realize the expected revenue. And I think in particular, now the official numbers are questioned by even some parliamentarian, like the chairman of the Public Finance, MP Sumantiran, himself raised this issue. To what extent we can, accept numbers coming from Treasury. The parliamentarian, argued that different times official come up with, different numbers, so that official numbers are really, I think, something that people are losing.
Because the budget proposals are good. It looks like a very qualitative budget. But when it comes to quantification, Mr. Tennakon, something is really missing. They need to do their homework in terms of getting the numbers right.
No,
do you agree or do you disagree?
I agree totally with Dr. Afonso when he, in his first opening up, he said, the statistics don't mean anything in a budget if they are not tied up with the policy package. Now, the issue here is not how they are going to realize the expected income. I mean, much more than that, much more important than that is towards what are they allocating these funds, specifically for what purpose. That is where the generation really starts. That is what is lacking in this budget. That is why I say this is a totally isolated budget. I don't know for what reason, a contained budget, a restricted budget for some reason without having any implication or connection to the policy packages that have been declared.
Mr. Tennakon, but isn't it to a degree that you have to agree that given that it is an election year and potentially with the amount of political instability that we are seeing so far in this country, that the finance minister has been rather restrained in the sense of giving out a package of goodies? He's actually, he's not reduced taxes on a lot of consumer goods. He's kept his cards pretty close to his chest as opposed to just, giving out a loot bag at the end of the party, as some would say. Now, don't you think he needs credit for that? Even though you do say it is an isolated budget, he has resisted the temptation to hand out a bag of goodies, and should that not be commended?
I think his hands are tied, Mm-hmm. Don't forget that just before the budget, they had to go for a sovereign bond issue of $2.4 billion. Now, the $2.4 billion sovereign debt raising is much more than what the IMF promised us. Almost twice. Now, 1.5 billion was the amount that was promised to us by the IMF. So, we are going for a sovereign bond issue for 2.4 billion. Now, what do you think, how do you think that success of that sovereign bond issue could have been ensured? Many reasons. If the IMF was reluctant to express its satisfaction about the performance, no chance of raising 2.4 billion or anything from the international market through a sovereign bond. At this rate of interest, this is a high rate of interest. It is going up to 7.5. Lowest is 6.2, spread over years. Then, even that is impossible if the backing of the IMF was not given, expressing their satisfaction about the performance, and that is where the finance minister's hands are tied.
Again, when you say
he couldn't have achieved this.
Can you say stand alone? Because, like you said, if the finance minister's hands are tied, don't you think his hands are tied because of a compounding of factors over a number of years?
No, I agree this from the beginning. as rightly said by Dr. Afonso, again I want to mention, you know, they started this decline in 2005. You know, that package that was announced, it was an excellent package. Nobody disputes that. The thing is that in the application, they miserably failed. Their directions were changed. And this is a government which depended on money coming from unidentified sources like the Belgium lender, you know, and George Soros is coming here to advise and give funds. I mean, this type of history that we have seen through. That is where they made the mistake. They thought that these things are coming, we can give a hands-free package to everybody to enjoy, and where are we today? We are in a very difficult situation. We must realize, as rightly said by both my colleagues here, you know, a growth rate of 3% is not unsatisfactory, is totally it should be rejected as a performance. 3% increase after governing 4 years, after a continued governance of 4 years. If our achievement is this, I think we are desperately directed towards some default.
I just want to add here.
Just 1 minute. Dr. Dunasinghe, I want to hear your thoughts on this. I think Dr. Ponga
Yes, I think
this as well.
Yeah,
about the growth rates especially. Can we consider Sri Lanka and India? Can we compare the two and, you know, speak about them like they're a similar case?
One thing is that, in addition to India, we see that the South Asian countries performing, I think, better than the rest of the other Asian countries.
Bangladesh.
And
Nepal.
Other than the Afghanistan, I think all the other countries in the South Asia are performing well. And Sri Lanka recording 3% is really, I think, something that is far below its potential, in particular after the war, after end of the civil war. And government also, you know, find it difficult to understand why the economy, you know, does not really, run fast. I feel like that. They look into the numbers, and in particular,
when you say you think the government fails to understand, are you saying they're at a lack of ideas?
No, I think to some extent we know that the GDP rebasing took place some years ago, and this rebasing also to some extent is responsible for this. I think this the growth rate that we, at the end of the day, statistical numbers, okay. So I think rebasing also to some extent is responsible for this lower rate, in addition to really the weak performance in the economy. And at the same time, I must add my perspective to this budget with respect to this, contained budget or constrained budget. I think I also to some extent agree with Mr. Tennakon that government, the finance minister is to some extent constrained. But at the same time, we must agree that presenting a budget of this nature at a time of election, to some extent, a good example. At least the future governments must at least comply or follow similar budgets. We have seen that how it was look like the budget in election years. So compared to such budget, I think even though it was posed by outsiders, I do not know, I have no evidence, but even if we believe that IMF posed the government to behave in this way, at least to some extent, I think it is good, rather than just distributing free handouts. Even though there are to some extent public servant wages, then the pension, revision of pension, and also increase in the Gampere year from 200 million to 300 million. Even though there are certain concessions or the certain certain payments made in that nature, still I think government has attempted to some extent to maintain some financial discipline. That is, I think, something that I must.
Dr. Dunusinghe, you speak about the Sri Lankan growth rate standing at 3% and that saying that this is very paltry in terms of the region itself. We are just probably second to Afghanistan, which records a growth rate of 2.7% and is known to be one of the poorest nations in the region, in Asia as a whole. So isn't this a negative for Sri Lanka, looking at the forward outlook? Isn't this a problematic situation for a country like Sri Lanka, which was once reeling with a lot of energy, with a lot of vibrance, with a lot of enthusiasm as far as the country's economy was concerned, but suddenly, why this pitfall?
Yeah, I think the poor performance of the economy, not just confined to the last 5 years, to my understanding. We have failed to introduce structural reforms we have not seen structural transformation as such, moving resources from low productive areas to more productive sectors. In particular, moving labor from agriculture to industry and services. Even though we argue that service sector account for nearly 60% of the GDP, if you look at the service sector type of service activities that we carried out, we cannot really be satisfied with the type of services activities, and service sector is heavily import dependent. So in addition, we have failed to utilize our skilled labor. Okay, youth and skilled labor keep migrating out of the country. So there are a number of issues in that nature that prevent us recording a higher growth rate. After the war, we witnessed something like 9%, 8% growth rate. Those are not sustainable at all. Because not sustainable in the sense that those actually created in the very short time, within the short period.
In other words, just trying to say is, it is because of the Mahinda Rajapaksa administration in the year 2010 and 2011 that we are in this pitfall right now.
No, I don't argue in that way. I argue that successive government fail for structural transformation.
But Dr. Dunusinghe, no government in the last 15 years I have been in journalism have been able to 100% fulfill the budget proposals.
It is not really the budget proposal as such, but we must have a long-term vision to a country, to an economy, identifying main sectors in the economy that we really targeting to develop. In particular, we know in developing countries, we need to see structural transformation, moving labor, capital and other resources from agriculture to other sectors, and sectors becoming more productive. Agriculture sector becoming more productive, and then the manufacturing, then the services like that. We have failed to introduce such transformation, so that as a result of that, we failed to utilize our skilled resources locally.
Because there was a 5-hub concept that was brought forward by the Mahinda Rajapaksa administration, saying that by 2017, 2016, this is going to be fully implemented, and Sri Lanka is going to be a knowledge hub. Sri Lanka is going to be a hub for ports. Sri Lanka is going to be a hub for education, so on and so forth. But nothing on reality has happened over the years.
Yeah, that is what actually.
And they had a vision. They said it's a 5-year plan, but they were not even elected to power in 2015.
Yeah, that is exactly.
Right now, the government comes to the plan saying that this is up until 2024. They're not even sure that whether they're going to remain in power for the next 1 year.
No, that is exactly what happened in the country. I mean,
all this.
The time to time, different parties, when they come into power, they change we have seen that they change their plan, earlier to some extent, even the economic framework. So as a result of that, country has suffered to a greater extent, not having a long-term vision and working towards that. So at the end of the day, we have now get into a trap where we find it difficult to accelerate the growth rate. We are, the debt stock is really high, so we find it difficult to finance it. And at the same time, balance of payment pressure is very high because the service sector entire to a greater extent depend on the import oriented, for example, transportation and retail and wholesale. So those are some of the issues that we have failed to address.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dunsinger. We need to go for a short commercial break. When we come back, we speak more about Budget 2019. Stay connected, stay with Face the Nation. We will be right back.